Alaikum everyone. Let us jump in and begin. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So as always, I'd like to begin by thanking all of you for being here. And I would like to welcome you to this third and final talk of this course called The Concept of Love in Islam. I'm going to start with a brief summary of the last two talks, and then I will move on to give a brief overview of today's talk, inshallah. In the first class, we roughly defined love, and we said that it was a state wherein you transcend the boundary between the self and the other. And when you do that, you become the thing that you love. You lose yourself in that other thing. And some of the signs or symptoms of this state, we said, include worship, devotion, remembrance, and self-surrender. And self-surrender is important. It is saying, I give up what I want and desire for what you want and desire. So that is a sign or a symptom of love. Anyway, after that, we went on to look at three different types of love: the love of this world, the love of human beings, and the love of God. We said that the love of God is the only love. It's the only love that can truly fulfill us because it is in our nature, or it is in our fitrah, to love perfection. And of course, only God is perfect. We also said that the love of God is necessary to remove the love of this world and to guide our love for others. And we ended the class by discussing how to love others correctly. In other words, we just ended the class by discussing what it means to love others for the sake of God. So in the second class, in the second class, we spoke about the connection between love and knowledge, and we said that we cannot love God until we know God. And we also said that once we know God, who is al-Wadud, or love itself, we cannot help but love God. Then we went on to discuss the importance of approaching the Quran in a state of surrender, and how, when we do this and through reciting the Quran, we can begin to cultivate the love of God in our hearts. Finally, we ended that second class with a short discussion on God's love for human beings in general and his love for virtuous human beings in particular. Okay, so that was class 1 and class 2. Today, I want to look at God's love for human beings in a little bit more depth, as well as the connection between love, patience, suffering, and death. And I know it sounds like love and suffering and death are contradictory, but as we'll see on the spiritual plane, they actually work hand in hand. Now, before I begin today's talk, inshallah, are there any questions that you have, clarifications from the other two courses, or anything else that you would like to um, ask me before I start? And as always, I'll remind everyone that two things. One, every 10 minutes or so, I will stop for questions. So if you could hold your questions until then, I'll be happy to try my best to answer them. And also, I have worked in some time for questions and answers, so please don't be shy. And please feel free to ask whatever question you might have. So it doesn't seem like we have any questions so far. Okay, and we will move on. So God loves the righteous. Last week, we said that the Quran speaks much more about God's love for human beings than it speaks about human beings' love for God. We also said that if God doesn't love us, then there's really no point in speaking about about us loving God. Therefore, we could say that the beginning, or even the goal, is to become the type of person that God loves. As the Quran states over and over again, God loves people who are beautiful on the inside and act beautifully on the outside. On the other hand, He does not love people who are ugly on the inside and act ugly on the outside. This is why I thought it would be a good idea to speak about one of the most beautiful qualities that a human being can have on this journey of love, and that is the quality of patience. Patience and love are intimately connected, just like uh, love and knowledge. This is because if God loves us, then He will bring us closer to Him. In order to get closer to Him, we have to be purified, and this purification will normally come in the forms of trials and tribulations. It is reported that the Prophet said, "The most severely tested people are the prophets, then the next best, then the next best. A man will be tested in accordance with his level of commitment to God." Okay. And on a side note, we should realize that two things. One, when we see other people suffering, we should not look down on them or judge them for it. Instead, we should think to ourselves, this person might be very close to God, which is why they are suffering. Secondly, when we ourselves are suffering, instead of getting down and sad and depressed, as we will talk about later, we should be grateful and thankful because it is a sign that we are moving, inshallah, closer to God. In any case, for this reason, according to this hadith, I think it is safe to say that the quality of patience is the best companion to have on the journey towards the love of God. And again, we will return to this idea of patience a little later, inshallah. I know it's a little early, but any questions before I continue? Okay. Facing difficulty and hardship. Many times we wonder why God allows us to go through so many tests and difficulties if He loves us. We wonder why God doesn't answer our prayers when He is the most gracious and the most merciful, Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. Thus, I want to talk about hardships because they can be an obstacle. They can be an obstacle that stops us from loving God, or they can be an obstacle that stops God from loving us. Okay? They can stop us from loving God because they can make us feel neglected, angry, or resentful towards Him when He doesn't answer our prayers. Difficulties can also block us from God loving us because instead of making us better people, they have the potential to make us worse. A lot of times we're tested so that we become humble and we turn towards God. But sometimes the opposite happens, okay? They have the potential, these tests and trials have the potential to make us arrogant and proud. And in this regard, the Quran states, in Surah 31, verse 32, when a wave covers them like a canopy of clouds, they call to Allah, offering him sincere devotion. But when He has delivered them safely to land, there are among them that halt between right and wrong. But none reject our signs except only a deceitful, ungrateful wretch. And more clearly in Surah 6, verse 43, then why, when our punishment came to them, did they not humble themselves? But their hearts became hardened, and Satan made attracted to them that which they were doing. Okay? So it can have the opposite effect. They should make us humble, but they can make us more arrogant and make our hearts harder. Now, the Quran gives at least two answers to this question of suffering and hardship in life. The first answer is that God allows people to be tested so that He can separate the faithful from the unfaithful. This way, no one can question God's justice on the day of judgment. For example, the Quran states in Surah 29, verse 34, do the people think that they will be left to say, we believe, and they will not be tried? But we have certainly tried those before them, and Allah will surely make evident those who are truthful, and He will surely make evident the liars. However, this understanding that God tests us for the sake of His justice is just one way to understand this verse. Another way to understand this verse, and I would argue that this is a more profound way, is that God tests us so that He can show us our true selves and the level of our faith. Most people are good at being good when everything is going well. However, when we are in the middle of a difficulty, many of our negative qualities come to surface. For example, the way a parent reacts to a child that misbehaves tells us much more about that parent than when that child isn't misbehaving. Or, for example, if you're in sales and a customer comes in and is a nice, kind, good customer, the way you act is very different than when you're dealing with a difficult customer. When you're dealing with a difficult customer, that is a bigger or a better indication of what you have inside of you, who you truly are when you lose your patience. Okay? Um, Therefore, in this sense, okay, and this is the interpretation of the verse I would like you to take home. Therefore, in this sense, God lets us be tested so that He can deepen our sense of self awareness. Otherwise, we would not be aware of our flaws, and therefore we would not be able to fix them. For this reason, we should always take a moment to watch our thoughts and feelings when we are in the middle of a difficulty. We should also remember that the truly righteous people are those that remain good, patient, and beautiful despite any trials and hardships they may be facing. And so tests and trials become a tool for self reflection and self correction. So they really are a mercy. Okay. The second answer that the Quran gives is that God tests us in order to purify us, strengthen us, and thereby help us reach our true human potential. In this case, tests and trials are a mercy from God and something that we should be grateful to have. Without them, we would remain stuck in our condition. These difficulties clean us and force us to move upwards. What was once your ceiling, excuse me for a moment. What was once your ceiling, okay, so once what was very high for you will inshallah eventually become your floor. So what was once very high for you and you couldn't reach will then become your floor, and you will be standing on top of it. You would have mastered it, and of course there will be a new ceiling in its place, right? And so we will climb up the ladder of self-improvement, okay, closer and closer to God, inshallah. So these difficulties clean us and force us to move upwards. According to the Quran, in Surah 3, verse 154, but all of this was that Allah might test what is in your breasts and purge what is in your hearts. For Allah knoweth well the secret of your hearts. And Surah 5, verse 6, Allah does not desire to put you in any difficulty, but He wishes to purify you and that He may complete His favor on you so that you may be grateful. God is pure, and therefore we can only return to Him when we are also pure. So we say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Now, if we take away Allah and use one of His other beautiful names, we would say, indeed we come from purity, and indeed to purity we shall return. Okay? So we have to be pure. And this is why our process of purification will continue even after we have passed away from this world. In other words, the process of purification will continue into the next world. Therefore, the point I want to simply make is that difficulties are a blessing in disguise. This is why Imam Ali alayhi salam is reported as saying, keep walking in your sickness for as long as possible. We always want to solve our problems as quickly as possible, but the Imam is telling us to do the exact opposite. This is because the longer we are sick, the more we are cleansed. However, along with this cleansing, we need to use our suffering as an opportunity to grow. Unfortunately, for many people, no matter how many times they go through the same thing, nothing changes. They do not become stronger and better people who are able to deal with their problems in a more beautiful way. In fact, they become even worse even if they remain the same. This is because they've had an opportunity to grow, but they have wasted it. They have squandered it. Rumi wrote a beautiful poem about the connection between difficulty and growth called The Guest House, and it goes like this. And it's a beautiful poem worth reading out. And this is how the poem goes. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows, who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I find that very beautiful. I hope you do too. Therefore, behind every difficulty is the grace and the mercy of God. To know and experience this, so not to just know it mentally. When I say know, I don't mean knowledge of the mind, I mean knowledge of the heart. To know and experience this is a sign of certain faith, and it is also a symptom of the love of God. Okay? Any questions? We do have a question. Just one second. Okay, the question is, why would God give us tribulations that would make him love us less? Aren't we told God only gives us that which we can handle? Yes, so God doesn't give us tribulations that would make him love us less. He gives us tribulations that would make him love us more. But again, it is our attitude towards the trials and tribulations that determine the outcome. So if our attitude is to be arrogant when we are facing a trial and to get angry and resentful towards God, then it will move us away from God. But the intention, according to the Quran, is that God is testing or is giving you a test or a trial so that you become more humble and realize your human limitations. And when you realize your limitations, what do? You turn towards God. So in fact, he doesn't do it with the purpose of turning us away, but he does it with the purpose of turning us towards him. Unfortunately, some human beings go in the opposite direction. And that is why it is so important to keep a humble heart and realize our limitations. That way, again, we will turn towards Allah, inshallah. Any other questions? And yes, God only gives us that which we can handle. We will discuss that, inshallah, in a bit. Nothing else? Shy or everything's understood? One of the two. Okay. Take a note. Okay. The question is, what exactly are we being purified from? The Islamic concept of purification is closely connected to the Shahada, or the testimony of faith. All Muslims say the words La ilaha illallah, meaning there is no God except the one true God. However, these words are not simply a statement that we need to make. They are a teaching and a way of life. So La ilaha illallah is so profound. It's actually the basis upon which you should live your whole life. So we often say this word even in dhikr and using our tasbih, but it's much more profound than just that, and it's much more profound than a way to convert someone into Islam. We can learn a lot about the Islamic spiritual tradition's understanding of reality when we start to use this formula of faith, or the Shahada, with the other beautiful names of God. In this way, we can say that there is no reality except the one true reality. Or we can say there is no life except the one true life. Or we can say there is no love except the one true love. Thus, purification is the implementation of the Shahada into our hearts. In other words, it is the implementation of God into our hearts. This means that the journey of purification is the journey of love. And this journey is made up of two steps. Okay? The first step is the La ilaha. In other words, purification begins with the removal of all gods, that is, gods with a small g, from your heart. Thus, the journey of love is not an easy one. Okay, to remove these gods from our hearts is not an easy journey. What it does is it shatters everything that you consider to be real, or that we consider to be real, everything in our lives that our lives were based upon, but were an illusion. Okay? And this is why Rumi says, being a candle is not easy. In order to give light, one must first burn. For this reason, the journey of purification is filled with difficulty and hardship. Look at the stories of the prophets and what they had to go through. Look at what they lost. Okay? Prophet Ayub is a perfect example, as well as all the other prophets. Imam Hussein, they're all perfect examples of this, but look at all the things that they lost. However, this should not frighten us. Okay? We should not be afraid. We should also remember that God gives back something greater than he takes. This is because after the La ilaha comes the illallah. The lesson is that on the spiritual path, you have to lose something in order to gain everything. That is, in order to gain God. In this regard, the Quran states in Surah 3, verse 92, by no means shall you attain righteousness unless you give freely of that which you love, and whatever you give of a truth, Allah knoweth it well. And Surah 65, verse 23, and whosoever fears Allah, he will make a way for him to get out from every difficulty, and he will provide for him from sources he never could imagine. How many times have we been stuck in a problem, and that problem was solved in a way that not in a million years we could have predicted? I don't know for you, but for myself, I could say that this has happened on numerous occasions. And if you reflect back, I'm guessing the same is true for you. Okay, and we have some questions. I will wait until the question time. Therefore, purification is to clean, that's the first step. Purification is to clean your heart from everything that is not God. First and foremost, it is the removal of the love of this world. This is because the world, in its role as dunya, is a temporary illusion. It is filled with false idols that veil you from the one true God. For this reason, if you love the world, you cannot love God. And if you love God, you cannot love this world. In other words, it is impossible for these two loves to coexist in one heart. The same way that it is impossible for clean water and dirty water to coexist in the same cup. Okay? If clean water and dirty water coexist in the same cup, the dirty water will taint the clean water. In the same way, if the love of God is in your heart and the love of the world is in your heart, the love of the world will taint your love of God. Okay? So they are simply incompatible. And this is why it is reported that the Prophet said, okay, be indifferent to the world and God will love you. In connection to this idea of removing the world from your heart, it is also reported that the Prophet advised us to die before you die. Okay? Sorry, just give me 1 second. Let me turn this off in case I'm not sure if you can hear the noise. Sorry. I'll turn off in a second. Thank you. Okay. So the Prophet advised us to die before you die. Here, the first death that the Prophet is talking about is a voluntary death. It is when you choose to leave this world by removing it from your heart. Now, please keep in mind, when I say leave this world, I don't mean go to a cave or go out somewhere alone and don't come to this world. I'm saying remove it from your heart. You still have to live in this world. You still have to take care of your responsibilities, your duties, your family, your work, all of that. You still should try your best to make some money, maybe have a nice house, a car or two, not excessively, of course, but I'm saying it's a voluntary death. It's when you choose to leave this world by removing it from your heart. If you do this, then the veils of the world will be lifted from your eyes, inshallah. And when you face the second death, which is not voluntary, we all face it. When you face the second death, you will not wake up blind and afraid. The Quran describes the state of those who don't see this world for what it is and for what it is in the hereafter by saying, in Surah 20, verse 124 to verse 126. And whoever turns away from my remembrance, indeed he will have a depressed life, and we will gather him on the day of resurrection blind. He will say, my Lord, why have you raised me blind while I was once seeing? Allah will say, thus did our signs come to you, and you forgot them, and thus will you this day be forgotten. And more clearly in verse 17, Surah 17, verse 72, the Quran says, but those who are blind in this world will be blind in the hereafter, and most astray from the path. Okay? Someone once asked Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, okay, who is a famous sheikh considered by many to be a saint of God, a friend of God. And they asked Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani how to die before dying, and he replied with the following: cease following your mind, desires, carnal self, and passions. Abstain from seeking the people. Ask nothing from anyone besides Allah Almighty. Let all your deeds be done for Allah's sake and for the pleasure of His divine countenance. Accept His management, judgment, and doing. So this is surrender. When you do so, you will be dead to yourself but alive in Him. Your heart will become His abode. He will turn it as He pleases, and your heart will be transferred to the Kaaba of His proximity. You will be always remembering Him, praising Him, and forgetting about anything else. Okay? And I cut some of this down so it wouldn't be too long. Okay, change slide. So, therefore, the journey of love, I see some questions. We're coming soon, inshallah, to the question section. Therefore, the journey of love entails the change of La ilaha. Okay? So, the removal of the false gods. This death is hated and feared by those who love this world. However, it is welcomed by those who see this world for what it really is. In fact, human beings can die many times in this life before actually dying. This is how one moves closer and closer to God. Death, then, is nothing but the removal of veils from our eyes. It is the increasing ability to see the world of the unseen and grow closer and closer to God. In other words, death is the birth into illallah. Okay? It is the love of God and the attainment of reality, certainty, and serenity. It is seeing from the inner heart. This is why Imam Ali alayhi salam speaks about 4 different types of souls that you can die and be born into. The last of these souls he calls the universal and divine soul. And universality implies, at least to some degree, the death of individuality. So I'm saying the death of the ego and the death of the self leads to the divine soul, which is a universal soul, okay, which is not about your individual egoistic self. Now, some questions before we continue. I have some questions here. Please feel free to ask any, and I will go through them, inshallah. So the first one is: people suffer in many ways, health, wealth, etc., which can be understood that Allah is testing us. Okay. How can one have patience to overcome the suffering through oppressors? How can one have patience to overcome the suffering through oppressors? Okay, so we will discuss later on how to cultivate patience in our hearts. So when it comes to oppression, so the question goes on to, sorry, I should finish the question. How can one have patience to overcome the suffering through oppressors? Is this the will of Allah? Examples of the suffering of people in Syria, Iraq, and the rest. This is an excellent question. So what I'm speaking about is generally I'm speaking about our kind of individual and personal trials and tests and tribulations. For example, our emotional tests, our mental tests, tests with our family, friends, tests with our businesses. However, of course, this test that other people are going through with oppression is a real test that they are suffering. So, according to the Quran, I would respond by saying it's a 2-part process here. One part is oppression is never accepted by the Quran. And so there's always different steps you can take against oppressors. One step to take against oppression is to fight it. If that's not possible, the Quran talks about how the earth is so expansive and that you can move So another option is to leave the place of oppression to a place where you are not oppressed. And so the Quran talks about different things you can do to avoid or to get rid of the oppression. So it's not the will of God that you should be oppressed per se, but it is still a test and a trial. So in that sense, it is the will of God that you should be tested. Um, it doesn't mean that He oppresses you. So in the Quran it says we test you by means of other people. So other people oppress you, but God lets it happen so that um, for the reasons we've been speaking about. So the second part of this that I wanted to mention is that while you are going through this oppression, so whether you are fighting it or you're moving somewhere else, or let us say you're stuck and can't do anything about it, in all of these situations, patience should be used. Okay? And so a state of patience within you should be adopted. And so whatever you are doing outwardly and actively, that is fine. But inwardly, the state of patience should remain. Okay? I hope that answers the question. Any other questions? My pleasure. Okay. And it's important to remember that God is not actively harming or oppressing us. In the Quran, it says, this evil that has come to you is by your own hands. Or again, as I said, another verse talks about how we test people by means of another people. Okay. It's so I just wanted to make that clear. Okay. So we'll continue because I don't see any more questions. Nothing. Okay. I missed this slide here. I'm sorry. Um, okay, so it's a birth into illallah. Patience. Okay. In the face of these trials and tribulations that lead to purification, the best companion to have is that of patience. Patience is the positive side of every negative. In other words, patience has a powerful ability to turn every negative into a positive. For example, it is reported that the Prophet said, "How wonderful is the affair of the believer! For if his for his affair, oh, excuse me, I'll start that again. It's there for you. How wonderful is the affair of the believer! For his affairs are all good. If something good happens to him, he is thankful for it, and that is good for him. If something bad happens to him, he bears it with patience, and that is good for him." Okay. Moreover, God makes it abundantly clear throughout the Quran that He loves people who are patient. For example, in Surah 41, verse 35, it says at the end of the verse, "And no one will be granted such goodness except those who exercise patience and self restraint, none but persons of the greatest good fortune." And in Surah 3, verse 200, "O you who believe, persevere in patience and constancy, vie in such perseverance, strengthen each other, and fear Allah that you may prosper." Okay. Now, in general, the act of being patient has two sides. It has a passive side and an active side. On the passive side, patience or sabr means to quietly and faithfully endure the hardships we are facing until they finish and our pain becomes bearable or leaves us altogether. Sometimes this feels difficult because we feel as though we have reached our limit. However, as the Quran states, God does not place a burden on anyone that they cannot bear. And the Prophet is reported to have said the following: "When a man's patience reaches its end, ease and relief sets in upon him." Okay? So your patience is going to be pushed to its limit. And when you think that's all you have, it's going to be pushed some more because you have a little more, you just don't know it. A lot of the times we see that when we think about something, we say we can't handle that. But when we are in it and we have no choice, we end up handling it. Okay? And the Quran also says, mirroring, or the Prophet mirrors what the Quran says when it says, "Verily, after difficulty comes ease." Okay, that's a verse in the Quran. So um, once you've reached the end of that patience and God has been able to show you everything he can about yourself and has been able to raise you to the highest possible state that that test or tribulation can bring you to, then inshallah ease and relief will set in. Okay, and it is difficult, but that is the point. The second side of sabr is its active side. In the Islamic tradition and in the Quran, the word sabr is often translated as perseverance, steadfastness, and fortitude. This means that sabr is not simply waiting, but it is also the way in which we handle ourselves during our difficulties and hardships. However, sorry. In other words, we cannot choose whether or not we face these trials and tribulations. However, we can choose how we understand them and how we deal with them. We can see them as difficulties or as blessings. We can face them with courage or with cowardice. They can increase our faith in Allah or they can decrease it. Whichever way, we will still face them. So you might as well choose the best way. According to the Quran, Surah 2, verse 155, be sure we shall test you with something of fear and hunger, some loss in goods or lives, or the fruits of your toil, but give glad tidings to those who patiently persevere. Or according to Rumi, patience is not sitting and waiting. So this is the active side. Patience is not sitting and waiting. It is foreseeing. It is looking at the thorn and seeing the rose. It's looking at the night and seeing the day. Lovers are patient and know that the moon needs time to become full. Okay? However, we are only human and our minds tend toward the negative. To have beautiful patience is extremely difficult. So the question becomes, how do we become more patient? In the last course I gave, called Cultivating a Virtuous Character, as well as in this course, I've mentioned several Islamic practices that all help us cultivate our higher and better human selves. Practices we mentioned, such as making dua, reciting the Quran, and perpetuating the dhikr, have an extremely powerful impact on the soul of human beings. I've already discussed how these practices function to bring the presence of God into our lives and transform our emotional, mental, and spiritual states. The point that I want to make right now is that there is no magic pill. If you want to love God or you want God to love you, then you have to have faith and you have to make an attempt. The Quran says in Surah 13, verse 11, surely Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change their own condition. Now, if you go to the gym and see someone lifting 200 pounds, you might think to yourself about how difficult it must be to lift that kind of weight. Just like if you see a spiritual person going through so many calamities, again, like Prophet Ayub, you must think how difficult it must be. However, if you ask the person lifting the weight, they will most likely tell you that the most difficult part was getting to the gym in the first place. The point is, the most difficult thing to do is to start. Okay? So the next time you are in a difficulty, I pray that you use these practices to help you remain patient in a way that pleases God. And when you're not in difficulty, I pray that you use these practices to increase your faith. The deeper your faith becomes, the easier it will become for you to handle this world. Okay? I remember talking to someone about the spiritual path, someone who I think is a highly spiritually developed person. I remember talking to them, and that person told me that the following. He said, as a person's spirituality grows, their difficulties increase in number, but their burdens decrease in weight. And I'm going to repeat that again because I think it's important. As a person's spirituality grows, their difficulties increase in number, but their burdens decrease in weight. Okay? And again, this is a reason why we should not be afraid, because if we are getting closer to God, we're getting more and more difficulties, but we should not be afraid because our faith is increasing, and so our ability to deal with these problems is becoming better and better, and it's becoming easier and easier, so that a person of high faith, Okay, even though they might face a lot, it is much harder for that person to become depressed, despondent, and in despair. When we look at the prophets who went through the most difficult of trials, we don't hear stories of them being depressed or anxious or things of that nature. They had that patience, that fortitude, that perseverance, that patience, that faith in God that allowed them to continue where something small might be very feel very heavy on us. For them, something big felt very light on them because of their faith in Allah. Okay, it was easy for them to handle. Okay, and I will pause here for questions. Again, there's 10 minutes left, and I was hoping and expecting some more questions. So um, if you do have any, now is the time. And if not, that's okay, of course. So I will wait a minute. And again, any questions, clarifications? If you have questions or clarifications you would like about the other parts of the course or about anything related to the topic in general, I would be happy to try my best. So we have one question. I'll just wait if there's one more or two more or three more. Okay, so the question is, how would our burdens decrease in weight? This is slightly confusing. How would our burdens decrease in weight? This is slightly confusing if the difficulties are increasing. So again, difficulties. So as I said, uh, the difficulties decrease in the burden decreases in weight. So things are not as heavy. So I'm I thought I felt maybe I wasn't clear. I felt as though I answered the question, but so I want to try and answer it in a different way. Um, so it's perhaps I can use the example of the person who lifts weights in the gym again. Uh, so for a person who goes to the gym for the first time, if he picks up 20 pounds, that is heavy. Okay, that is a heavy burden for that person who for the first time is lifting 20 pounds. But as a person continues to go to the gym and they continue to work out and they continue to build their muscle, in other words, increase their iman, increase their faith, they continue to build their muscle, then all of a sudden you'll see that they have 200 pounds on they'll be lifting 200 pounds, but that is easier for them than the person who's lifting 20 pounds for the first time. That's because the other person has been in the gym for a long time. Their muscles are developed, they're stronger, they're able to do it more easily. In the same way, a person who has very little faith, when they face a small calamity in this world, a small test or a trial, it's like the end of the world for them. Okay, because that is their end all be all. But as their faith increases and they realize God is there all the time, and they start to really realize in the depths of in the depths of their being that behind this difficulty is the mercy of God, and it is making us better, it is making me better, and is making me closer to God. Then when they see that, when that burden comes to them, then it is much more easy to handle when they see the blessing of God behind it, because they realize, oh, this is good for me. I want this. And they would not take away the burden even if they could, because they want to become closer to God. So as their faith increases, and this is why I said it's synonymous with the love of God. So as their love increases, they want more love from God and they want God to love them more. And when they realize the only way to do this is through their tests and trials, then they will welcome them. And so the burden will be less because it's not heavy for them. They're happy about it, just like the guest house in Rumi's poem. They invite these burdens in laughing because they know all of them is a guest from beyond. Okay? I've seen some questions, a few questions that haven't come to me. I think they maybe been sent privately or in a way that I can't read. I saw two questions. If you type it into the attendee chat box, you're welcome for the question. If you type it into the attendee chat box and it says send to all uh, or send to presenter, and then underneath that you type your question there, I will receive it. Otherwise, I'm not receiving the question. I saw two questions and I would really like to try my best to answer them. So Perhaps you could try again. Again, in the attendee chat section, it would say send to all or send to presenter, and then you type your question underneath in the box there. So I'll just wait a few moments for the couple of people who did have a question to see if they can figure it out. It says send to presenter. It says send to presenter. Okay, yeah, so it says send to presenter in the chat section, and you type it out there. Anywhere else, I don't get to see it. No? Okay. It doesn't seem like it's working for these couple of individuals. Um, why didn't that question show up? Okay, here. Okay, one of them came through. Okay. Last week you discussed the metaphysics of love, yes, with Jamil and Jalal, Jamal and Jamal and Jamal and Jalal, or Jamil and Jalil. Yeah, I was wondering if you know. Okay. So the questions came now. Okay, so last week you discussed the metaphysics of love with the concepts of Jamal and Jalal. I was wondering if you know of any books that we can read to learn more. Yes, lots. It depends what type of books that you would like to read them from. Uh, there are okay. Um, there is a book that I really like. It's from a professor here uh, uh, in the Western world, but so there are a group of professors in Western academia who are also Muslims, but they approach it from a Muslim angle, and so their writing is well informed because they're aware of both the stud. They've studied a lot. A lot of them have studied in Iran and Iraq as well as in the West, so they have a good grasp of what's being taught in both places. And because they come at it from the Islamic perspective, they are very, I think, anyway, I would recommend those books personally. There are also many great books within our school that you could read, but two of the books that one book I would recommend is called, uh, it's by William Chittick, and it's called Divine Love. It's a little big, but it's fascinating. I would definitely recommend that. And it again, it relies a lot on the Quran. It relies a lot on the Hadith, um, and it's an excellent book. It's called Divine Love, and I can't remember the subtitle, but it's by William Chittick. Um, he's written, I think, two or three books on divine love. Uh, One is from Rumi's perspective, but this one, Divine Love, is actually so. If you remember in the first lecture, I spoke about how this love was not, yeah, his wife as well has, yeah, and in the Tao of Islam, she speaks about love too. So his wife, Sachiko Murata, has a book called The Tao of Islam, as well as others, I'm sure, that speak of love. But it's in there also, and they're I think, Alhamdulillah, they're good scholars. So if you remember if in the first lecture, I said that I don't want love to be exclusive to Rumi or Sufism, and so in Divine Love, William Chittick's Divine Love, he already wrote a book about Rumi and love, and so he purposefully stayed away from the popular figures of love and looked at all the other people speaking about love in the Islamic tradition, and so that's why I would recommend that book personally. You're very welcome. So here we says purging the heart. We have another question. Purging the heart also includes removing ego, jealousy, judging others, and all kind of vices. Absolutely, it is everything. Um, uh, purging the heart is so when I said that the first step is to remove the love of this world in your heart, that's the la ilaha, right? So the first step of the shahada, or the first step towards God, is the la ilaha. And the ilaha are the gods of this world, but that's just the first level of the gods of this world, are the material gods. So money, fame, cars, these are material. But then it's also the la ilaha, is the ilaha of yourself, the false god of yourself, so your ego. And it's in your ego where you have that jealousy, judging, and all of that. And so part of the la ilaha, part of the movement towards God and the removal of gods, is to remove, yes, all the negative qualities in our heart. And if you remember, if you were in the other course I taught, as well as some parts of this course, you'll remember I said when you polish the mirror of your heart, that's removing all of that stuff from you. And then that mirror is able to reflect God's divine names and qualities. So your jealousy, for example, and your judgment and all that other stuff will be replaced with God's qualities of mercy and kindness and forgiveness and truth and justice, etc. And so that cleaning and polishing of the heart is very, very important. And that surrender also. So, yes, thank you. Any other questions? No? I will wait 30 seconds just in case. Perhaps someone is a slower typer and we don't want to leave them out for that. So basically, manifesting God's attributes in ourselves. Yes. So if you want, cultivating a virtuous character was about this topic of manifesting godly qualities within ourselves. The only thing I would change, so it says, the question is, so basically manifesting God's attributes in ourselves. Yes. The word I would change though is manifesting to reflecting. Uh, when you polish your heart, you become a vessel for God to uh, kind of express Himself. It's not that manifesting is wrong; it's correct. But I prefer the word reflecting. I think it a little more accurately captures what we're saying. But when you're polished, then God is able to work through you. So He's able to reflect His qualities through you, and of course, only to your capacity and to your measure. Cannot do it to God's measure, or and the saints do it to a higher measure, the imams to a higher, the prophets to a higher, etc., according to all of their capacities. But yes, and we have that ability. Well, inshallah, by the grace of God, we can do it too. So yes, we would reflect God's names and qualities. So, and all the other reason, attributes, is that in Najr Balaga, Imam Ali talks about not using attributes because that would imply that there's God and something different from God when God is complete unity. So we would not normally just say God's names and qualities without saying attributes. It might be a little bit of a technicality. uh, there was a long philosophical debate that's still ongoing till today about this idea, if God has attributes or not. We don't need to get into that, but yeah. So we would reflect God's names and qualities, and what a beautiful state that is to be in. And because when you reflect it, it radiates outward, so people around you can feel that and they can become affected by that. And you can actually change, by the grace of God, other people's states by just reflecting, having a polished heart, which reflects God's qualities and names. You can actually affect another person's state. Um, so, and that's why the Imams and the Prophets advised us so much to surround ourselves by good company. uh, Always keep company with people that are have a positive impact on your soul. Okay, they don't have to be in the negative sense when people say, "Oh, this person's very religious," in the negative way. Um, that's not what it means. Surround yourself by beautiful people. They will impact you in inshallah in a beautiful way, and it will help your journey. Just like reading the Quran impacts your soul, just like dhikr impacts yourself, a beautiful person impacts your soul also. We have another question here. You had mentioned that Allah does not change your condition till you change. Can you give a couple of examples? Well, we spoke about that Hadith Qudsi that said, again, I'm very bad at paraphrasing this one, but it says, when you come to me a hand's length, I come to you an arm's length. When you come to me walking, I come to you running. So it's not that you change your condition, that you change it. It's that you do something, and then God will do the rest for you, because we're really unaware of how little power we have and how much power God does have. It's kind of like the ocean, and Rumi alludes to this. The wave doesn't have to worry about being carried to the shore. The ocean will carry the wave to the shore. Okay, the wave just has to be there. Okay, and so your job is just to kind of show up. Your job is to try your best to be sincere. Your job is to do a little bit, as much as you can. Okay, do as much as you can, but know that God in the end will do it for you. But do as much as you can. Um, so God, and also this can be understood that God does not change a condition of a people unless they change the condition themselves. This can be understood in a deeper way, and it can be understood to mean that God does not change your condition until not that you change the condition, but you change yourself. Okay, and this is a deeper understanding of the verse, that God will change the condition, but first you change yourself. And that's another way that this verse has been understood and interpreted. Yeah. So your important thing is to take care of yourself. Again, to quote Rumi, and yes, I do quote him a lot. It is, he says, I was once young and I wanted to change the world. Now I'm wise and I want to change myself. And this is a very important and true statement. Uh, a wise person focuses on changing themselves because they know that change is what radiates into any other changes. If you haven't changed yourself and are changing the world, there's a high chance that will. So if your heart is unclean and you're still trying to do good, there's a chance that it will not transfer into good. But if you have a good heart, whatever you do, there's a good chance it will turn into good in this world. Okay. And so you can't really predict what's going to happen outside of yourself, right? You might try and do some good, it might turn into bad. That's not in your control. And so you should not worry about that. What you should worry about is in your control. Change yourself, do your best. And whatever is going to happen outside of that is not in your hands, it's in Allah's hands. And we should have faith in God that whatever happens is what is best. You are welcome. Okay. Well, I will end by saying thank you so much for joining me for this class. And if you're here for all three of them, thank you so much for joining me for all of them. As always, I really do appreciate it, and I'm very grateful that you spend this time with me. I really hope that it is beneficial to you. And I will end with a reminder to yourself and to myself that all these speeches we go to, all these speeches we hear, they're just words, they're just talk. What is important is that we put them into action. If you listen to this speech and you feel good, but in a day or two it's the same old, then the speech is not worth much. Any speech, this speech or a different one, it doesn't matter. What matters is there's a lot of talking and listening going on. What matters is acting and changing by the grace of God. Remember, it all happens by the grace of God. So I do pray and I remind you and myself that, we talked about the Quran in this course. In the other course, we talked about the dhikr and others. Put it into practice. We only have a limited time on this earth, and I would hate for us to waste it. You are very welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here. Uh, thank you. Thank you. Rumi's co-assignment part of the class. Thank you very much. They are online if you did miss the classes. They are online if you'd like to have a look. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I pray that you have a good rest of the night, good rest of the week, inshallah. And I hope that I will be presenting a course sometime in the future, sooner rather than later. Okay. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.